The text message glowed on my screen like a dagger to the heart. Reeves family New Year's bash at Harborview Estates this Saturday. You're not invited. We can't have your financial struggles ruining the atmosphere. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the panoramic view of Seattle's waterfront stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of my executive office. Harborview Estates wasn't just the most exclusive residential complex in the Pacific Northwest. It was mine. 5 years ago, a message like that would have devastated me. Now it was almost comical. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Another text followed. We have appearances to maintain. Don't embarrass us again. I glanced up at the framed document on my wall, me signing the final acquisition papers for Harborview Properties in a $340 million deal. But no one in my family knew that. To them, I was still Olivia Reeves, the irresponsible dreamer who walked away from law school at 26 to play around in real estate, instead of joining the family's prestigious legal dynasty. They never asked what happened after. They didn't. No, I worked every position possible in property management: leasing agent, maintenance coordinator, site manager, learning the industry from the ground up. Or that I flipped a struggling apartment complex in Tacoma into a wait-listed luxury community within 30 months. They certainly didn't know I now controlled one of the largest private real estate portfolios on the West Coast. Another message appeared, this one from my cousin Blake. Mom says don't show up in your business casual outfit. It's black tie only, and we don't want you networking with our clients. These days, my wardrobe consisted of tailored Armani suits and Carolina Herrera dresses. But Blake wouldn't recognize actual success if it handed him a business card. My assistant Jordan buzzed in. Ms. Reeves, the quarterly revenue reports are ready for your review, and the Martinez Group confirmed the acquisition of their Portland properties. I nodded, satisfied. And the Reeves family reservation for Harborview's penthouse event space is confirmed. They've selected the premium catering package and reserved the VIP entrance. I smiled. Uncle Richard had boasted online for weeks about securing Seattle's most coveted venue for their New Year's celebration. The waiting list for Harborview's penthouse was typically 2 years long, longer for holiday dates. I stood, straightened my blazer, and glanced once more at the security monitor showing the elegant lobby. Let the family enjoy the amenities. The Reeves name isn't just on their invitation, it's etched in marble above the entrance. No, let them think it's all complimentary for now, I replied. I swiveled in my chair, the Seattle skyline glittering under the winter sun, Mount Rainier, majestic in the distance. The family group chat continued pinging incessantly. Logistics, dress codes, self-important reminders. My mother had joined the conversation now. Please understand, Olivia. Your uncle just wants everything to reflect well on the family. Harborview has standards, you know. Oh, we definitely had standards, just not the superficial ones they prioritized. I opened my laptop and reviewed the guest profiles my team had meticulously compiled. Uncle Richard had been flagged by 3 luxury venues for demanding excessive complimentary amenities and berating staff when refused. Cousin Blake was notorious for forgetting to pay his bar tabs at upscale establishments. Aunt Gwendolyn had been quietly banned from 2 exclusive residential communities after harassment complaints from maintenance staff. The only reason their reservation had been accepted at my flagship property was because they had no idea I owned it. Another notification. Emma, my younger sister and the only family member who knew the truth. Are you seriously going to let them strut around your crown jewel property like that? They're insufferable, Liv. Don't worry, I typed back. I've got something spectacular planned. Emma had supported me from day one, when I worked 16-hour days learning property management systems and shadowing maintenance crews. When I secured my first investment loan. When I purchased my first struggling property on Aurora Avenue. She believed in my vision when everyone else called it a pipe dream. "Promise me you'll record their reactions," she messaged. "Already arranged," I replied. "Security footage from every angle, plus Emma's personal camera for close-ups." I leaned back, remembering the Christmas dinner where Uncle Richard publicly questioned my career choice. "Real estate?" he had laughed, swirling expensive bourbon in his crystal glass. "That's for people who couldn't cut it in a professional field. Come back when you've passed the bar exam like a real Reeves." When my first property turned a profit 6 months later, the family acted like my success was a fluke, not the result of strategic renovation and rebranding. A knock interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called. Marcus Alvarez, my head of security and operations, stepped in with a tablet in hand. "Ms. Reeves, I've finalized Saturday's security protocol. Are you certain you want to wait until midnight before making the revelation?" I smiled. "Absolutely. Let them enjoy the champagne. Let them network and boast. Let them feel completely at home." Marcus nodded. He'd been with me since I purchased that first struggling property. He'd witnessed my 4 a.m. property inspections, the weekends spent reviewing building codes, the holidays, devoted to investor presentations while my family vacationed in Aspen. He understood the power of timing, how the most impactful revelations happen when people are most comfortable. "And their access credentials?" Marcus asked, scrolling through his notes. "Issue them the standard VIP passes," I replied, "but program them to deactivate at exactly 11:55 p.m. He raised an eyebrow. "Even your parents?" I paused, remembering the day I told my father I was leaving law school. We were in his corner office at Reeves, Whitman and Associates, the Seattle legal institution my grandfather had founded. "No daughter of mine is going to be a glorified landlord," he'd declared, voice cold with disappointment. "If you walk away from law, you walk away from this family's legacy and its support." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Especially my parents," I confirmed. Marcus nodded and made a note. "For the penthouse? You requested specific arrangements?" "Yes," I said, leaning forward. "At 11:55, reconfigure the lighting. Everything dark except a spotlight on my reserved section. And ensure the digital displays are programmed with the presentation I sent." "You," Marcus smiled. "Calculated impact. I like it." After he left, I moved to the panoramic windows of my downtown office. Seattle's iconic skyline reflected in Elliott Bay, Harborview Estates' distinctive silhouette dominating the waterfront where I once walked in secondhand business attire, dropping off rental applications at properties I now owned. This city had witnessed my transformation, not through family connections or inherited privilege, but through vision, calculated risk, and relentless work ethic. My phone buzzed again. "Uncle Richard. We've hired a professional photographer. Please don't attend if you're still in that career exploration phase. Harborview has extremely high standards." I smiled, running my fingers along the embossed nameplate on my desk. "Olivia Reeves, CEO and founder, Harborview Properties Group." "Oh, Uncle Richard," I murmured. "You have no idea what our standards actually are." The days before New Year's Eve were precisely orchestrated. I reviewed security protocols, camera placements, and staff instructions. Many of my employees, who had experienced my family's condescension during previous encounters, volunteered for the event. Some even offered to work without holiday premium pay just to witness the revelation. Friday afternoon, I called Emma. "Everything set for tomorrow?" "Absolutely," she laughed. "Battery packs charged, secondary memory cards packed. I've planned camera angles like a documentary filmmaker." Then her tone softened. "But Liv, are you completely sure about this? They're still family after all." I looked at the framed photo on my desk, me on the day I closed my first property deal, standing in front of a rundown building with a determined smile, holding keys and paperwork. They stopped being supportive the moment I chose my own path. Instead of theirs, they've had 5 years to ask about my life, to show interest in my work. Instead, they've excluded me from every family celebration because I didn't fit their definition of success. I glanced toward my closet, where tomorrow's outfit waited. I wouldn't wear designer labels to the revelation. I would wear the same navy blazer and sensible pumps I'd worn to my first property showing, cleaned and preserved as a reminder of where I started. Now they would stand beneath my company logo, etched in illuminated glass above the entrance they'd so proudly walk through. If you've ever had someone dismiss your dreams or tell you that you're making a mistake by following your own path, you won't want to miss what happens at midnight. Hit subscribe to see the moment they realize exactly whose name is on the building. They've been bragging about all month. Sometimes the best vindication doesn't require arguing. Sometimes it just takes showing them the deed. Saturday morning dawned in Seattle with rare winter sunshine breaking through the clouds, casting golden light across Harborview Estates' gleaming glass exterior. The kind of perfect weather that property photographers dream about, but can rarely schedule. I stood by the window in my private office on Harborview's top floor, dressed in that meaningful navy blazer that had witnessed the beginning of my journey. "The first guests are arriving," Marcus informed me through the intercom. "Your uncle just tried to upgrade to the presidential suite without authorization." I smiled. "And when you explained it wasn't available?" He insisted on speaking with the owner. I informed him that the owner would be making a special appearance at midnight. On the security feed, Uncle Richard was gesturing animatedly in the marble lobby, his voice rising as he pointed to his reservation details. Cousin Blake stood nearby, already helping himself to the complimentary champagne while photographing the crystal chandelier for his social media. My parents had just walked in, my father scanning the architecture with critical eyes, my mother nervously adjusting her expensive jewelry, financed, I knew, through a second mortgage on their home. Penthouse is prepared," Marcus continued. "Countdown display installed, spotlight positioned as requested." "And the presentation folder?" I asked, patting the leather portfolio on my desk. Inside it, every dismissive email, every mocking comment about playing real estate agent, every invitation I'd been excluded from, alongside property acquisition documents, press features about my company's growth, and most importantly, the master deed to Harborview Estates with my signature prominently displayed. "Emma's in position with her camera," Marcus confirmed. I sent a message to the family group chat. "Hope you all enjoy Harborview Estates tonight. The amenities are world-class." The responses flooded in immediately. "Uncle Richard, how would you know? They'd never let you pass the lobby without us." Blake, "Stick to your starter apartments, cousin." My mother, "Olivia, please don't try to join us. It would be uncomfortable for everyone." I watched them read my message while continuing their preparations, still laughing, still dismissing my existence. "Begin Phase 1, I said into the intercom. Within minutes, my carefully trained staff began subtly enhancing the family's experience. Extra attentiveness, personalized service, the kind of white glove treatment that made guests feel important, all while security cameras captured every moment of their growing comfort and entitlement. Uncle Richard basked in the attention, introducing himself to other wealthy guests as if he were the host rather than merely an attendee. Aunt Gwendolyn exclaimed loudly about having connections at Harborview whenever someone complimented the venue. My father, ever the calculating attorney, was already exchanging business cards with potential clients. From my office, I monitored it all, watching them inhabit my creation while believing themselves superior to its architect. Every compliment they accepted about the venue was rightfully mine. Every feature they admired represented my vision, not theirs. As the evening progressed, the penthouse filled with Seattle's elite. Live music played, champagne flowed, and the spectacular view of the Space Needle and Elliott Bay provided the perfect backdrop for their self-congratulatory networking. My family positioned themselves centrally, as if the gathering orbited around them. At 11:45 p.m., I left my office and made my way through the private elevator that connected directly to the penthouse level. My heart beat steadily, not with nervousness, but with a calm certainty. The journey that began with rejection was about to come full circle. Phase 2, I said softly, into my discreet communication device. Throughout the penthouse, subtle changes began. The music transitioned to a composition I'd commissioned specifically for this moment. The lighting shifted imperceptibly, guiding attention toward the main stage where the countdown to midnight would soon begin. At precisely 11:55, as programmed, my family's access credentials deactivated with a soft beep on their VIP badges. Simultaneously, the penthouse lights dimmed except for a single spotlight illuminating a previously curtained section of the wall, revealing an enormous portrait of me signing Harborview's acquisition papers, alongside the company's mission, statement, and my signature. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the evening's host through the sound system, "as we prepare to welcome the new year, Harborview Estates has a special announcement. Please welcome the founder, owner, and CEO of Harborview Properties Group, Olivia Reeves." I stepped onto the stage as confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. My family stood frozen near the champagne fountain, expressions transitioning from confusion to disbelief as they processed my presence and the portrait now illuminated behind me. "Thank you all for joining us tonight in my home," I began, my voice calm and clear through the microphone. "Harborview has always been about creating spaces where people feel valued, where excellence is recognized, where potential is respected." I looked directly at my family group, now huddled together in shocked silence. 5 years ago, I was told that real estate wasn't a respectable career for someone with my background, that property management was beneath the Reeves family name. I gestured toward the magnificent space around us. I decided to let my work speak for itself. My father took an unsteady step forward. "Olivia, what is this?" His voice cracked with confusion. "What are you doing here?" "I'm hosting you, Father." I maintained my composure, projecting the same confidence that had carried me through countless investor meetings and acquisition negotiations. "Welcome to my company, the one you said would never succeed." Uncle Richard pushed forward, face flushing. "This is some kind of stunt. You can't possibly own Harborview Estates?" I finished for him. With a gesture, the digital displays throughout the penthouse activated, showing a timeline of my company's growth, property acquisitions, and press coverage. "I not only own this building, Uncle Richard. I own the entire Harborview portfolio, 16 properties across the Pacific Northwest, valued at over $1.2 billion. Aunt Gwendolyn gasped audibly, her champagne glass tilting dangerously. That's impossible." "Is it impossible," I asked gently, "that the niece you banned from family gatherings now signs your lease agreement? That the cousin you mocked now employs the valets who park your car? That the daughter you dismissed now owns the venue you've been bragging about securing?" The giant screens displayed security footage of them arriving earlier, side by side with their previous dismissive messages about my career. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Blake's face had turned ashen as he recognized his own words, projected for everyone to see. "Your VIP credentials have been deactivated," I continued calmly. "Not because you aren't important guests, but because at Harborview we value respect for our spaces, for our staff, and for the diverse paths people take to success." "Olivia, please!" My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling. This is your family. We never meant—" "Never meant what, Mom?" I asked quietly. "Never meant to exclude me from 5 years of celebrations? Never meant to mock my career choice? Never meant to dismiss my intelligence and drive because it wasn't directed where you wanted it to be?" The countdown to midnight began on the screens, 60 seconds remaining in the year. "You can stay and enjoy the celebration," I said, addressing both my family and the wider audience. Harborview welcomes everyone who brings positivity and respect into our spaces. That's been our mission from day one, creating environments where people feel valued for who they are, not judged for who others think they should be. As the countdown reached 10 seconds, I raised my champagne glass. To new beginnings, to recognizing potential wherever it appears, and to finding success on your own terms. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. Confetti fell, music swelled, and the Space Needle's fireworks burst into life beyond the windows. Amidst the celebration, I stepped down from the stage and approached my stunned family. "Your suite reservations for the weekend remain active," I said quietly. "Unlike some, I don't believe in withdrawing hospitality once offered. The Harborview standard isn't about exclusion. It's about excellence in how we treat people, regardless of their title or background." I handed my father the leather portfolio. "You might find this educational reading, the story of how a glorified landlord built something that will outlast any legal precedent your firm has established." As I turned to greet other guests, Emma appeared at my side, camera in hand. "That was epic," she whispered. "How do you feel?" I looked around at the magnificent space I had created, where once I had been deemed unworthy of an invitation. "I feel complete. Not because I proved them wrong, but because I proved myself right." In the days that followed, my revelation became the talk of Seattle's business community. The Seattle Business Journal ran a feature, Harborview Empire, how Olivia Reeves built a real estate powerhouse while her family wasn't looking. Industry publications highlighted my unconventional path and hands-on management style. My phone filled with messages, some apologetic, others defensive, a few genuinely reflective. I read them all but responded to none. They'd had 5 years to ask about my life. They could wait a few days for my reply. 2 weeks later, a formal envelope arrived from Reeves, Whitman and Associates, my father's law firm. Inside was an offer to handle all legal matters for Harborview Properties at a special family rate, along with an invitation to join their annual partners' retreat. I sent back a business card and a handwritten note. "No thank you. I prefer building empires to serving them, but I appreciate the recognition, belated as it is." Harborview continued to flourish. Our reputation for exceptional properties and ethical management made us the premier real estate group in the region. I established a mentorship program specifically for unconventional candidates, people with vision and determination, but without traditional credentials or family connections. Every new employee heard my story, not as a tale of revenge, but as evidence that success comes in many forms and follows many paths. That sometimes the people closest to you are the last to recognize your potential, and that the best response to dismissal isn't resentment, but excellence. One evening, months later, I received an unexpected visit from my father. He stood awkwardly in my office, taking in the views, the awards, the evidence of success he had never thought possible. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I was so fixated on what I thought success should look like that I couldn't recognize it in any other form." I gestured for him to sit. "It took me a long time to understand that your disapproval came from fear, not malice," I replied. "Fear that I would fail. Fear that I would regret my choices. Fear that I would reflect poorly on the family name. And instead, you elevated it beyond anything we achieved," he acknowledged. "Your grandfather would have been proud. He started with nothing too, you know. We just forgot that part of our history somewhere along the way. We didn't solve everything that evening, but we began a conversation that should have started years earlier, not about who was right or wrong, but about how narrowly we define success and how easily we dismiss paths we don't understand." The following New Year's Eve, I hosted another celebration at Harborview. This time, the invitations to my family came directly from me, not as the relative they had underestimated, But as the businesswoman they now respected. Some relationships had healed, others remained distant, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. As midnight approached, I stood at the edge of the penthouse balcony, Seattle spreading before me like a map of possibilities. Emma joined me, champagne in hand. "Quite a different atmosphere this year," she observed. I nodded, watching Uncle Richard actually thanking a staff member instead of demanding special treatment. "The biggest difference isn't in how they treat me," I said. "It's in how I see myself. I no longer need their validation to know my worth." When the countdown began, I didn't take the stage. I didn't need to. My name wasn't just on an invitation or a building entrance anymore. It was on a legacy I was building day by day, property by property, opportunity by opportunity. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside for choosing your own path, remember this. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Hit subscribe if this resonated with you, and share your own story in the comments. Were you ever dismissed for your dreams? How did you respond? This channel celebrates every person who found their own definition of success, especially when others couldn't see their vision. Because sometimes the lease agreement speaks louder than words ever could. The days leading up to New Year's Eve were a masterclass in strategic preparation. Each morning began with a detailed briefing from my executive team, reviewing every aspect of the upcoming revelation. The Harborview penthouse, my penthouse, would become both stage and statement, and nothing could be left to chance. "The catering team needs final approval on the menu," Jordan said, sliding a tablet across my desk. "Your uncle specifically requested Cristal champagne and beluga caviar." I reviewed the extravagant requests with a knowing smile. Uncle Richard's taste had always exceeded his resources. The family didn't know that the special rate they'd been offered was actually triple the standard booking fee, a premium they'd gladly paid to secure the venue everyone in Seattle was talking about. "Approve everything," I said, authorizing the charges with a swipe. "And add the vintage Dom Perignon he didn't request. Let him think it's a complimentary upgrade." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "That's unusually generous." "It's not generosity," I replied. "It's setting the stage. I want them comfortable, indulgent. I want them feeling like royalty right before they learn who really wears the crown." The Harborview penthouse wasn't just another luxury venue. It was my masterpiece. 20,000 square feet of architectural innovation with retractable glass walls that transformed indoor spaces to open-air terraces with a panoramic view of Puget Sound. The New York Times Style magazine had featured it last month, calling it the Pacific Northwest's most coveted event space. Uncle Richard had likely framed that article, never suspecting his disowned niece was quoted throughout it. "We've assigned staff who haven't previously encountered your family," Marcus reported during our afternoon security meeting. "Though, I should mention that several employees specifically volunteered for this event." I glanced up from the seating chart I was reviewing. "Why would they volunteer for holiday duty?" Marcus smiled. "Because they've heard stories about your family, Ms. Reeves. The staff tends to be protective of you." That caught me off guard. I'd built Harborview focused entirely on forward momentum, rarely looking back at the rejection that had fueled my drive. The idea that my employees felt protective of me, that they'd shared stories, created a narrative where I was someone worth defending, touched something unexpected. "Tell them I appreciate their loyalty," I said, regaining my composure. "But remind everyone this isn't about revenge, it's about recognition." Later that afternoon, I visited the penthouse to personally inspect the preparations. The space was already being transformed. Floral arrangements in precisely the color scheme my mother had always preferred, furnishings arranged to showcase both the view and the guests, lighting programmed to create the perfect ambiance for photographs. I paused by the section of wall where my portrait would be revealed at 11:55 p.m. Currently hidden behind elegant drapery, the 7-foot image showed me not in triumphant pose, but in a moment of focused work, reviewing blueprints at a construction site, hair pulled back, expression intent. It captured not the glory of success, but the process that created it, the daily dedication my family had dismissed as a hobby. "The drape release mechanism has been tested 12 times, said Lena, my events director. "Perfect execution every time," I nodded. "And the screens?" "Programmed with 3 content sequences: your company's growth timeline, your personal journey, and," she hesitated, "the family messages." The 3rd sequence contained 5 years of texts, emails, and social media posts where my family had mocked my career, excluded me from gatherings, or dismissed my achievements. I'd debated including it, questioning whether public humiliation served any purpose beyond petty satisfaction. Keep all 3 sequences, I decided finally. But program the 3rd to display only on the screens nearest my family's section. The other guests don't need to witness their specific cruelty, just the contrast between their perception and reality. As I walked the space, I noticed the table arrangements had been shifted slightly from my original plan. "Why is the family's table positioned closer to the bar than the stage?" I asked. Lena checked her tablet. "Your cousin Blake's profile indicates he typically consumes between 7 and 9 alcoholic beverages at social events. We thought positioning near the restrooms would be pragmatic." I suppressed a smile. My team's attention to detail was impeccable, even when it came to anticipating my cousin's notorious lack of restraint. Thoughtful, but move them center front. I want them to have the perfect view when the countdown begins. Later that evening, I reviewed the guest list in my downtown condo. Beyond my family, the penthouse would host 200 of Seattle's most influential people: tech executives, arts patrons, civic leaders, and the social figures my family had always desperately wanted to impress. People who now took my calls without hesitation, who sought my input on development projects and community initiatives. My phone buzzed with a text from Blake. "Heard the Harborview New Year's party is the event. Can you get us a better table? We're connected to the owner." I stared at the message, marveling at the audacity. 5 years of radio silence except when he needed legal advice for his failed startup ventures, and now he was trying to leverage a connection that didn't exist to me for social advantage. "The reservation is already confirmed," I replied neutrally. "I'm sure your table will be perfect." "Come on, Olivia," he persisted. "You must know someone on the staff. This is important to my image." His image, always his image, never his character or accomplishments. Blake had built his entire persona around appearing successful without doing the work success required. He collected the right watches, frequented the right restaurants, dated the right women, all financed by my uncle's dwindling fortune and a series of maxed-out credit cards. "I'm afraid I can't help," I responded, then added, "Are you sure you want me there?" Last I heard, I wasn't welcome at family events. His reply was immediate. "Don't be dramatic. That was just because you were going through that weird phase." As if my career had been a temporary rebellion, like the summer I dyed my hair purple or the semester I took pottery classes. Besides, you might meet someone worthwhile there. Lots of eligible bachelors with actual careers. I set my phone down without responding. 5 years building an empire, and he still saw me as someone to be fixed. A woman whose primary objective should be finding a husband with actual professional credentials. The irony wasn't lost on me that several of those eligible bachelors had recently approached me about investment opportunities or mentorship. The next morning, I met with Emma for coffee at my favorite local shop, the same place where we'd gathered 5 years earlier when I'd made the decision to leave law school. The owner, Samir, greeted me by name, and showed us to my table near the window. "Remember when we sat here and you showed me your business plan on a stack of napkins?" Emma asked, stirring her latte. "You'd mapped out the entire 5-year strategy for Harborview." I smiled, remembering the moment clearly. I was terrified, excited, but terrified. "But determined," Emma added. "I've never seen anyone so certain in the face of so much opposition." That night, our parents had held what they called a family intervention, an hours-long session where they'd listed all the ways my decision would ruin my life and embarrass the family. How no one would take me seriously in real estate without connections. How I was throwing away generations of legal tradition. How I'd regret wasting my education on playing house flipper. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd listened to them?" Emma asked quietly. I considered the question seriously. I'd be miserable, competent, probably successful, by their definition, but fundamentally miserable. And probably still uninvited to family gatherings, Emma noted wryly. "Remember when they excluded you from Grandma's 80th because you couldn't contribute to the gift they wanted to get her?" I did remember. They'd pooled funds for an extravagant European cruise, deliberately choosing a price point they knew I couldn't afford during my early struggling days. When I'd offered to contribute what I could, Uncle Richard had suggested that perhaps this one is for actual family members who made something of themselves. "Do you think they'll finally see you differently after tomorrow?" Emma asked. I sipped my coffee, considering. Honestly, I'm not sure I care anymore. This revelation isn't about changing their minds, it's about claiming my narrative. For 5 years, they've told a story about me that isn't true. Tomorrow, I correct the record. Back at the office, I reviewed the final security plans with Marcus. The revelation was timed precisely, at 11:55 p.m., giving exactly 5 minutes, before the new year, for my family to absorb the truth before the celebration continued. "We've prepared contingencies for various reactions," Marcus explained, scrolling through scenarios on his tablet. "If they attempt to leave immediately, the elevators will operate on reduced speed. If they become confrontational, we have plainclothes, security positioned nearby. If they attempt to save face by claiming they knew all along—" "They won't," I interrupted confidently. "Their pride wouldn't allow that story. They'd have been boasting about their real estate mogul relative for years if they'd had any idea." Marcus nodded. "There's another possibility we should discuss. What if they attempt reconciliation on the spot? Public apologies, emotional displays?" The question caught me off guard. In all my planning, I'd prepared for anger, denial, embarrassment, but not immediate contrition, not genuine remorse. "Do you think that's likely?" I asked. "People surprise us when cornered," he replied, "especially when there are witnesses. Your uncle, in particular, has a documented history of performative generosity when it serves his image." He was right. Uncle Richard was a master of public magnanimity and private cruelty. His legal practice specialized in high-profile divorces, where he portrayed himself as a champion of fairness while ruthlessly leveraging every client advantage. His annual charity gala contributions were always precisely calculated for maximum tax benefit. If they attempt reconciliation, I decided, I'll acknowledge it politely but defer any meaningful response until after the event. This moment isn't about their redemption arc. As evening approached, I retreated to my private apartment on Harborview's 35th floor, a space unknown to anyone outside my immediate team. While the penthouse above bustled with final preparations, I took a moment of stillness, looking out at the city I'd come to shape in small but significant ways. Beyond building luxury properties, Harborview had established a housing innovation lab that developed affordable housing solutions. We'd converted a struggling hotel into transitional housing for domestic violence survivors. We'd created apprenticeship programs for young people interested in construction and property management, people without fancy degrees or family connections. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Your mother and I will be arriving at Harborview at 9 p.m. If you've reconsidered your absence from family functions, you might try to meet us for coffee beforehand. Not an invitation to the celebration, not an acknowledgement of exclusion, just a conditional offer of coffee, predicated on me having reconsidered, as if I were the one who needed to change my position. I set the phone down without responding and opened my closet. Pushing past designer evening wear, I reached for the navy blazer that had seen me through countless property inspections and my first nervous investor pitch. It wasn't fashionable by current standards, but it carried a history my family had never bothered to learn. Emma arrived at my apartment at 8:30, dressed elegantly in midnight blue, camera equipment disguised in what appeared to be a stylish tote bag. Final security checks complete, she reported, seamlessly slipping into the role we'd practiced. The family has reserved the VIP entrance for 9:15. Blake is already posting on social media about hosting Seattle's elite to ring in the new year. I laughed. Hosting? On whose dime? On yours, apparently, Emma replied, showing me her phone screen. There was Blake's post, a stock photo of Harborview's exterior with the caption, "Proud to welcome Seattle's finest to our exclusive New Year's celebration at the magnificent Harborview Estates. Perks of being connected to the right people." The right people, I repeated softly. He has no idea how right that is. At 9:01 p.m., we moved to my private observation room adjacent to the penthouse, a space concealed behind one-way glass where I could monitor the event unseen. The first guests were arriving, admiring the spectacular space with its soaring ceilings and panoramic views. At 9:17, my family made their entrance. Uncle Richard led the procession, imperiously instructing the staff about his coat as if addressing servants rather than hospitality professionals. Aunt Gwendolyn followed, inspecting the floral arrangements with critical eyes. Blake and his latest girlfriend posed for selfies by the floor-to-ceiling windows, carefully angling to capture both their outfits and the Space Needle in the background. My parents entered more reservedly, my father scanning the room for potential clients, my mother nervously adjusting her jewelry. I recognized her necklace as a family heirloom she'd once told me I would never appreciate properly, given my commercial mindset. The irony is breathtaking, Emma whispered beside me. They're so proud to be here, in your building, using your amenities, bragging about their connection to a property they have no idea you own. I watched as they were escorted to their prime table, as champagne was poured, as they positioned themselves as central figures in a narrative where they were merely characters I had scripted. There was a strange peace in observing their self-importance, knowing what awaited them at midnight. Are you nervous? Emma asked. I considered the question carefully. Not nervous, just ready. For 5 years, I've built something they couldn't imagine, not to impress them or prove them wrong, but because it was the right path for me. Tonight isn't about their reaction, it's about honoring that journey. As the evening progressed, the penthouse filled with Seattle's notable figures. Tech innovators mingled with cultural leaders. Community organizers chatted with sustainable development pioneers. These were my peers now, people who valued creativity, impact, and authentic contribution over family names or traditional credentials. Through the one-way glass, I watched my family work the room with practiced charm, dropping hints about connections that had secured their access to this exclusive venue. Uncle Richard had cornered the CEO of a major tech company, likely prospecting for clients. Blake was exaggerating his role at his father's firm to an unimpressed venture capitalist. My mother was photographing everything, no doubt for careful curation on her social media. At 11:30, I changed into my navy blazer and slipped through the private entrance to the service area behind the main stage. The staff greeted me with respectful nods, many offering encouraging smiles. Word had spread about tonight's revelation, and there was a palpable sense of anticipation among those who had witnessed my family's behavior during previous visits. Marcus appeared at my side, tablet in hand. Final systems check complete. Screens calibrated, spotlight tested, reveal mechanism functioning perfectly. Timeline programmed to initiate at exactly 11:55. I nodded, feeling a strange calmness settle over me. How many security cameras are trained on my family's table? 4. Dedicated angles, he confirmed. Plus, Emma's position gives her perfect framing of their expressions. And the deed presentation? Marcus smiled. Queued up precisely as you requested. The transition from their dismissive messages to your acquisition documentation is quite impactful. At 11:50, the evening's MC began guiding guests toward the countdown area. From my position behind the stage, I could see my family claiming prime spots, Uncle Richard practically elbowing aside other guests to ensure his prominence. At 11:54, the MC spoke into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before we count down to the new year, Harborview Estates has a special announcement. This evening isn't just a celebration of the calendar turning. It's an anniversary of vision, perseverance, and redefining success on one's own terms. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. My family exchanged glances, clearly wondering if they should appear to be in the know about this unplanned segment. At exactly 11:55, the space transformed. The main lights dimmed while a single spotlight illuminated the stage. The hidden drapery fell away, revealing my portrait. On screens throughout the penthouse, a timeline appeared, tracing Harborview's growth from my first struggling property to the current 16-building portfolio valued at over $5 billion. Please welcome the visionary founder, owner, and CEO of Harborview Properties Group, a leader who built an empire by recognizing potential others missed, Olivia Reeves. I stepped onto the stage, the spotlight catching the familiar fabric of my navy blazer. For a breathless moment, the room fell silent as recognition dawned across hundreds of faces. But I watched only 5, my family members, their expressions transitioning from confusion to disbelief to stunned realization. Thank you all for joining us tonight, I began, my voice steady and clear through the professional sound system. 5 years ago, I made a decision that my family called foolish. I left a path others had chosen for me to create something authentic to my own vision. My gaze found my father, who had gone completely still. His normally confident posture collapsed into something resembling shock. Beside him, my mother's hand covered her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Tonight, as we prepare to welcome a new year, I'm reminded that the most meaningful journeys often begin with the courage to disappoint others' expectations. The screens transition to show the original Harborview property, the struggling apartment complex I'd renovated into the foundation of my company. Some of you here tonight have been told that your dreams aren't practical, that your vision isn't valid, that success only looks one specific way. I paused, letting my words resonate. I'm living proof that conventional wisdom is often conventionally wrong. Uncle Richard had recovered enough to whisper furiously to my father, his face flushing dark red. Blake stood frozen, champagne glass suspended halfway to his mouth, his Instagram-ready pose forgotten. Success isn't measured by following predetermined paths. It's built through vision, perseverance, and the courage to define achievement on your own terms. On the screens nearest my family, their own messages now appeared. The dismissals, the exclusions, the mockery, alongside headlines announcing my company's triumphs. The contrast was devastating in its clarity. Their words, playing pretend in real estate. The Seattle Business Journal, Reeves revolutionizes Seattle's luxury property market. Their message, don't embarrass us at family functions. The Wall Street Journal, Harborview's innovative approach redefines urban living. As we count down to midnight, I continued, I invite each of you to consider what possibilities await when you trust your own vision, even when, perhaps especially, when others cannot yet see it. The room had gone completely silent, hundreds of guests transfixed by the unfolding revelation. My family remained motionless, each processing the magnitude of what they were witnessing, the niece they'd excluded now commanding the venue they'd fought to secure, the daughter they'd dismissed now controlling the empire they'd been attempting to impress. The countdown to the new year will begin momentarily, I concluded. But first, I want to acknowledge someone who believed in this journey from the beginning. I gestured toward Emma, who stepped forward, camera temporarily lowered. My sister, who saw potential when others saw only risk, who understood that sometimes the most powerful statement isn't telling people you'll succeed, it's showing them you already have. The screen shifted to the countdown display, 60 seconds to midnight. I stepped from the stage, moving through the crowd that parted respectfully before me. Guests whispered congratulations, some reaching out to touch my arm or shake my hand as I passed. By the time I reached my family's table, the countdown had reached 30 seconds. Olivia, my father began, his voice barely audible. We had no idea. No, I agreed calmly. You didn't. You never asked. This is your company. Aunt Gwendolyn's voice cracked with disbelief. All of this? Every square foot, every design element, every staff member you've been ordering around. All evening. I maintained steady eye contact, not with anger but with quiet confidence. The empire you've been using to impress your friends was built by the niece you didn't consider worth including in family photos. Why didn't you tell us? My mother whispered, tears forming in her eyes. I did try to tell you, I corrected. Gently. 5 years ago, you just weren't interested in listening. The countdown reached 10 seconds. Around us, guests began chanting the numbers, energy building toward the midnight celebration. My family remained silent, still processing the seismic shift in their understanding. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! Cheers erupted throughout the penthouse. Music swelled, champagne corks popped, and couples embraced. The spectacular fireworks display launched from the Space Needle, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the night sky in brilliant bursts of color and light. In the midst of the celebration, my family stood utterly still, as if suspended in their own separate reality. The contrast was striking, joy and festivity surrounding their small island of shock and disbelief. Your VIP passes will continue working through breakfast tomorrow, I said, professional and composed. The presidential suite you requested wasn't available because it's my private residence, but your reserved accommodations have been upgraded. Unlike some, I believe hospitality should be extended even to those who haven't earned it. I turned to leave, then paused, reaching into my blazer pocket. Oh, and Uncle Richard? This is for you. I handed him a folded document. What's this? He asked, voice hollow. The lease agreement for your law firm's offices in the Westlake Tower. I smiled slightly at his confusion. Harborview acquired that building last quarter. You'll notice my signature on the landlord line. Your rent increase notice goes out next week. As I moved away, Emma fell into step beside me, her camera capturing every moment discreetly. That was masterful, she whispered. Are you okay? I considered the question as we made our way through the celebrating crowd. I'm better than okay, I realized. I'm free. For 5 years, I had carried the weight of their dismissal alongside my growing success. Each achievement had been shadowed by the knowledge that the people who should have been proudest still considered me a disappointment. That burden had lifted now, not because they finally recognized my worth, but because I fully recognized it myself. The revelation wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation of my narrative, my accomplishments, and my right to define success on my own. Terms. Later, as the celebration continued around us, Emma and I stood on the private terrace overlooking Seattle's glittering landscape. "Do you think they'll try to reconcile now?" she asked. "Probably," I acknowledged. Success has a way of making people reconsider their judgments. Will you let them? I watched the fireworks reflecting on Elliott Bay, considering. Reconciliation requires both acknowledgement and change. If they can offer both, maybe. But I won't accept a relationship based on what I've built rather than who I am. Emma nodded, understanding the distinction. They missed so much of your journey. They did, I agreed. But that was their choice. And this. I gestured to the magnificent space around us, to the empire I had built from nothing but determination and vision. This was mine. As the new year's first hour unfolded, I moved through my creation with quiet pride, greeting guests, thanking staff, and occasionally catching glimpses of my family huddled in bewildered conversation. They had arrived believing themselves the most important people in the room. Now they were coming to terms with being merely guests in a world I had created. The revelation hadn't brought vindictive pleasure. Instead, it had delivered something far more valuable, the peaceful certainty that I had never needed their approval to succeed. Their validation, so desperately sought in earlier years, now seemed irrelevant compared to the solid reality of what I had built. If you've ever had someone dismiss your dreams or tell you that your path wasn't worthwhile, I would later say in reflecting on that night, remember that the greatest validation isn't proving critics wrong. It's building something so undeniably magnificent that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Success isn't about revenge. It's about revelation. The new year had begun with truth unveiled, reality acknowledged, and a hard-earned freedom that comes not from others' recognition, but from fully owning your journey, even the parts others once used to dismiss you. Sometimes the most powerful statement isn't telling people who you are. It's showing them what you've become while they weren't paying attention. The New Year's celebration continued around us like an elegant storm, but I existed in its eye, calm, centered, observing the ripples of my revelation spreading through the crowd. Seattle's elite, who had been my family's aspiration for decades, now approached me with newfound respect. Business cards extended, connections offered. The irony wasn't lost on me that for years, my family had chased these very introductions, while I had earned them through vision and execution rather than social maneuvering. "Ms. Reeves," called out Catherine Zhao, the formidable CEO of Pacific Northwest's largest tech venture fund, cutting through a cluster of partygoers to reach me. "I've been trying to meet you for months. Your adaptive reuse project downtown is revolutionary. Converting that abandoned department store into mixed affordable housing and innovation workspace? Brilliant." I smiled, remembering how that particular project had been ridiculed by Uncle Richard as charity work that would bankrupt any serious investor. The development had not only won 3 sustainability awards, but had generated returns that outpaced traditional luxury developments. "Thank you, Catherine. That project holds special significance for me." We exchanged contact information, agreeing to meet in the coming weeks to discuss potential collaboration on her company's new campus. As Catherine moved away, I caught sight of my family across the room. They had regrouped near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows, huddled together like survivors of an unexpected storm. My father appeared to be in heated discussion with Uncle Richard, while my mother kept glancing anxiously in my direction. Blake stood slightly apart, furiously typing on his phone, likely trying to spin this revelation to somehow place himself adjacent to my success. Emma appeared at my side, champagne flute in one hand, camera discreetly held in the other. "Blake's already updated his LinkedIn," she reported, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Apparently, he's now claiming to have provided early strategic consultation to Harborview Properties." I laughed, genuinely amused by his desperate grasp for relevance. His strategic consultation consisted of telling me I was wasting my time and should marry rich instead of playing with buildings. The family's in complete disarray, Emma continued. Uncle Richard keeps insisting there must be some mistake, that you must be just the public face for the real owners. Dad seems to be cycling between shock and something that might actually be pride. And Mom's already told 3 people that she always knew you had special vision. A server approached with a silver tray. Ms. Reeves, the special package you arranged? I nodded, taking the elegant envelope from the tray. Perfect timing. Across the room, I could see a subtle shift in the family dynamic as they noticed this exchange. Curiosity momentarily overcame their shock, and they watched intently as I made my way toward their cluster, envelope in hand. Happy New Year, I said calmly as I approached. Up close, their expressions were even more revealing. A complex mixture of disbelief, embarrassment, and dawning recognition of their new reality. Olivia, my mother began, her voice unnaturally high. This is quite a surprise. Is it really? I asked, genuinely curious. 5 years is a long time to not ask a single substantive question about my career. Uncle Richard cleared his throat, lawyer instincts kicking in as he sought to regain control of the situation. Well, this is certainly impressive, though I imagine you had significant investor backing. Who actually holds the controlling interest in— I do, I interrupted smoothly. 70% ownership. The remaining 30% is distributed among early employees and strategic partners. I smiled. My company, my vision, my execution. His expression soured further. Richard Reeves had spent a lifetime being the dominant voice in every room, and finding himself suddenly diminished, on property I owned, surrounded by people who now recognized me as their peer, was clearly disorienting. I've brought something for you, I said, extending the envelope. Consider it a New Year's gift. My father took it warily, as if it might contain something explosive. In many ways it did. He opened it slowly, removing the contents. A formal document on Harborview letterhead, bearing my signature and the company seal. What is this? He asked, voice uncharacteristically uncertain. The lease agreement for the Reeves family lake. House, I replied. 5 summers ago, shortly after I'd left law school, my parents had been forced to sell our family's beloved lakeside retreat, a casualty of my father's overextension in a failed investment. The loss of that property had been particularly painful, as it represented generations of family memories. I don't understand, my mother said, leaning to see the document. I purchased it last year through a holding company, I explained. The previous owners were planning to demolish it for a larger development. I've had it restored to its original condition, with some modern updates to the infrastructure. My father stared at the document, then at me, comprehension slowly dawning. You bought back the lake house? But why? Why didn't you tell us? Would you have accepted it from me? I asked simply. Would you have believed I could afford it? Or would you have assumed I was being financially irresponsible, going into debt to play real estate developer with a sentimental property? The truth registered on his face. No, they wouldn't have believed me capable of such a purchase. They would have worried, criticized, questioned, never imagining I had the resources to acquire a multi-million-dollar vacation property outright. The deed will be transferred to a family trust, I continued. The lease agreement ensures it. Remains a Reeves family gathering place for the next 3 generations, regardless of individual financial circumstances. My mother's eyes filled with tears. But after how we've treated you, why would you do this? I considered my answer carefully, aware that my response would set the tone for whatever relationship might be possible moving forward. Because that house holds memories that preceded the division between us, I said finally. Because despite everything, preserving family history matters to me. and because success afforded me the opportunity to be generous in a way you couldn't imagine I ever would be. A mix of emotions crossed her face: gratitude, shame, and something more complex, the realization that she had fundamentally misunderstood her own daughter. "There are conditions," I added, turning to my uncle. "The property is for family use only, not for impressing clients or colleagues. It's not a status symbol, it's a place for genuine connection. If that purpose is violated, management reverts to me exclusively." Uncle Richard's mouth tightened, but he nodded stiffly. Even in his current state of shock, he recognized the exceptional value of what was being offered, and that he was in no position to negotiate terms. Blake, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. "So, all this time when we thought you were struggling, you were actually—" "What, secretly building an empire?" "Not secretly," I corrected. "Openly. I've been featured in business publications, spoken at industry conferences, received awards. My success wasn't hidden. You simply weren't interested in looking." The weight of this truth settled visibly on them. The realization that their narrative about me had been not just wrong, but willfully maintained through deliberate disinterest in my actual life. Before they could respond, Marcus appeared discreetly at my side. "Ms. Reeves, Governor Winters has arrived and is asking to speak with you about the Affordable Housing Initiative." "Thank you, Marcus. Please tell her I'll join her momentarily." I turned back to my family. "Enjoy the remainder of the evening. We can discuss the lake house details another time. Your suite keys are at the front desk whenever you're ready to retire." As I turned to leave, my father reached out, gently touching my arm. "Olivia, wait. He struggled, a man accustomed to articulate legal arguments suddenly at a loss for words. "Later, Dad," I said, not unkindly. "This isn't the moment for that conversation." As I moved through the crowd toward the governor, I felt lighter somehow. Not from having humiliated my family, but from having finally corrected the record. For years, they had controlled the narrative about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. That narrative had now been decisively rewritten, not through argument or explanation, but through irrefutable demonstration. The remainder of the evening unfolded in a series of meaningful connections and congratulations from guests who had witnessed the revelation. Some expressed admiration for the dramatic unveiling, others shared their own stories of being underestimated and finding vindication through achievement. Shortly after 2 a.m., as the celebration began winding down, I retreated to my private office to review security footage of the evening. Emma joined me, bringing 2 flutes of champagne. "To owning your story," she toasted, clinking her glass against mine. "To writing it yourself," I amended, taking a sip. On the monitors, we watched recordings of key moments: my entrance, my family's shocked recognition, the scattered reactions throughout the room as understanding spread among the guests. One camera had perfectly captured Uncle Richard's expression, transitioning from confusion to disbelief, to the particular discomfort of a man realizing he has gravely miscalculated. "Do you think they'll try to spin this somehow?" Emma asked. "You know how they operate. They could try to claim they were in on it all along, or that they secretly supported you." I shook my head. Too many witnesses, too much documentation of their actual position. Besides, I added, scrolling through the footage, I don't think they've processed it enough yet to formulate a strategy. This wasn't just a revelation of my success. It was a fundamental challenge to their worldview. For people like my family, hierarchies were rigid and predetermined. Success followed established patterns. Validation came from recognized institutions and traditional paths. The idea that their dismissed relative could create her own definition of achievement, one that ultimately surpassed their own, wasn't just surprising. It was paradigm-shifting. "What happens tomorrow?" Emma asked. "When they wake up in your hotel, eat breakfast in your restaurant, and have to face you without an audience?" I considered this. I've arranged for a private dining room for a family breakfast. No staff except those who've never interacted with them before. No audience, no witnesses. Just us and the new reality. Emma raised an eyebrow. You're giving them privacy for their reckoning? That's surprisingly merciful. It's not mercy, I clarified. It's strategy. Public humiliation creates defensiveness. Private confrontation offers the possibility of authentic realization. The truth was more complex than I was willing to admit aloud. Part of me, a small, persistent part that had survived 5 years of exclusion and dismissal, still wanted a genuine relationship with my family. Not on their terms of conditional acceptance, but on new terms built on mutual respect and recognition of our different paths. Whether that was possible remained to be seen. At 9 a.m. the following morning, I entered the Cedar Room, a private dining space with spectacular views of Mount Rainier on clear days. I'd chosen it deliberately for its intimate scale and residential atmosphere, more like a family dining room than a commercial restaurant space. My family was already seated when I arrived, the conversation halting abruptly at my entrance. They looked tired, the combined effects of celebration, shock, and likely a night of intense discussion evident in their faces. "Good morning," I said, taking the empty chair at the head of the table. "I trust you slept well." Nods and murmured affirmations followed. The tension was palpable. No one quite sure how to proceed in this new dynamic where I was not only their equal, but effectively their host, and, in Uncle Richard's case, their landlord. "I've ordered a selection for breakfast," I continued, as servers entered with trays of pastries, fruit, and coffee. "But additional items can be prepared if you prefer." The accommodations were impressive, my father offered, breaking the awkward silence. "Your attention to detail is remarkable." "Thank you." I accepted the compliment with a small nod. That attention to detail extends throughout our properties. It's a cornerstone of our brand identity. "Our brand?" Uncle Richard repeated, a hint of his usual sharpness returning. "And who exactly is our? I find it difficult to believe you built all this independently." Classic Richard, unable to conceive of success that didn't follow his prescribed formula. Even faced with overwhelming evidence, he was searching for the male mentor, the wealthy backer, the privileged connection that would make my achievement fit his worldview. Harborview began as my solo venture, I explained calmly, pouring myself coffee. I leveraged my first property's equity to secure financing for the second. The third came through a partnership with a sustainable development fund. By the fifth acquisition, I had established enough credibility to attract institutional investors, on my terms. I handed him a sleek portfolio that Marcus had prepared, containing public records of each transaction, press coverage of major developments, and a clear ownership structure. "You'll find everything fully documented. I built this company through strategic vision, calculated risk, and execution excellence, principles that translate across industries, including law." My father leaned forward, reviewing the materials, with the careful attention of a man who had spent 4 decades scrutinizing legal documents. "This is extraordinary," he admitted finally, looking up at me with something I'd rarely seen directed my way. Genuine respect. "Your equity position is substantial," he noted, focusing on the ownership breakdown. "You've maintained controlling interest through multiple funding rounds. That's uncommon." "I was very clear about my terms from the beginning," I explained. "Investors who wanted more control went elsewhere. Those who believed in my vision accepted my leadership." My mother, who had remained unusually quiet, finally spoke. "All this time, when we thought you were struggling, were you just letting us believe that?" The question wasn't accusatory, but confused, trying to reconcile years of false narrative with the reality before her. "I wasn't struggling, but I was working incredibly hard," I answered honestly. 16-hour days, 7-day weeks, reinvesting every dollar of profit back into the company. There were moments of financial uncertainty, especially in the early years, but I never reached out for help because the help always came with conditions I wasn't willing to accept. Like rejoining the law firm, my father supplied quietly. Like abandoning the path I had chosen for the one you had selected, I confirmed. Aunt Gwendolyn, who had been sullenly pushing fruit around her plate, looked up sharply. So this whole production last night, the dramatic reveal, the spotlight, the public humiliation, that was your revenge? Your way of punishing us for not supporting your career change? Her framing was so perfectly in character, recasting herself as the victim rather than addressing her years of deliberate exclusion and mockery. No, Aunt Gwendolyn, I replied evenly. It wasn't revenge, it was correction. For 5 years, you've told a story about me that wasn't true. You've excluded me from family functions based on a false narrative about my capabilities and success. Last night simply aligned perception with reality. By deliberately embarrassing us in front of Seattle's elite, she persisted. By allowing you to experience the consequences of your own assumptions, I countered. No one forced Uncle Richard to boast about his connections to Harborview. No one compelled Blake to claim he was hosting an event he merely attended. You positioned yourselves in a narrative of your own creation, and reality simply contradicted it. Blake, uncharacteristically subdued, spoke for the first time. So what happens now? We're just supposed to pretend the last 5 years didn't happen? That we didn't? That I didn't? He trailed off, unable to directly acknowledge his behavior. I'm not interested in pretending anything, I said. That's been the problem all along. The family pretending I was a failure rather than seeing my actual journey. What happens next depends on whether you're willing to see me as I am, not as you assumed I was. A heavy silence fell over the table as they processed this simple but profound requirement. The lake house, my father said finally. Why did you really buy it back? I considered deflecting, but decided on honesty. Because despite everything, there were moments of genuine family connection there. Because Grandma taught me to swim. Off that dock. Because you taught me to sail on that lake. I met his gaze directly. The dismissal hurt, Dad. The exclusion was painful. But completely erasing the good memories alongside the bad seemed unnecessarily absolute. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition, perhaps, that the daughter he thought he'd lost to a foolish career choice was still there, still valuing family connection, still honoring traditions that mattered, just not at the expense of her own authentic path. We were wrong, he said simply. I was wrong. Coming from Bradford Reeves, a man who had built his legal reputation on never admitting error, these words carried extraordinary weight. Yes, I agreed, neither harsh nor triumphant. You were. Can that be addressed? He asked carefully. Not erased or forgotten, but acknowledged as a starting point for something different? I set down my coffee cup, considering his question. 5 years of building Harborview had taught me about foundations, how to assess their strength, how to repair structural damage, how to determine whether renovation was possible or if complete rebuilding was necessary. I believe in second chances, I said finally. I've built my business partly by recognizing potential value where others saw only liabilities. But renovation requires honest assessment of the damage and commitment to structural change, not just cosmetic updates. My mother reached hesitantly across the table toward my hand. We'd like to try, Olivia, to understand the business you've built, to know the person you've become. I allowed her fingers to touch mine briefly, a small connection, tentative but real. That would require genuine interest in my work and my life, not polite tolerance until I conform to your expectations. I think, my father said slowly, We've been definitively shown that our expectations were the problem, not your choices. Uncle Richard shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling with this new dynamic where his dismissive judgments had been so thoroughly disproven. The property portfolio is admittedly impressive, he conceded grudgingly. Though real estate can be cyclical, one must always consider the long-term. Richard, my father interrupted sharply. Stop. Just stop. The table fell silent, everyone startled by this unprecedented challenge to Uncle Richard's authority within the family hierarchy. My daughter, my father continued deliberately, has built something extraordinary through vision and determination. She doesn't need your qualified approval or cautionary addendums. Uncle Richard's face flushed, but for perhaps the first time in his life, he remained silent. The lake house is available to the family starting next weekend, I said, redirecting the conversation. The renovation is complete, and the caretaker has been notified of the trust arrangement. Will you join us there? My mother asked, hope evident in her voice. Perhaps for President's Day weekend? The whole family traditionally gathers then. The invitation hung in the air, a genuine first step, but one that carried echoes of past exclusion. I'll consider it, I replied honestly, but my schedule is quite demanding, and rebuilding relationships requires more than a single weekend of forced proximity. Of course, she nodded quickly. Whatever works for you, we just want the opportunity. As breakfast concluded, my family departed with handshakes and awkward half-hugs, each processing the seismic shift in our dynamic differently. Uncle Richard remained stiffly formal, shaking my hand as he might a business associate's. Blake hovered uncertainly between his usual bravado and newfound respect. My parents lingered, clearly wanting to say more but unsure how to proceed. I have a meeting with investors at 11, I said gently, giving them a timeline rather than an abrupt dismissal. But I'm sure we'll speak again soon. After they left, I returned to my office, where Emma waited for my report. How did it go? She asked eagerly. Did Uncle Richard choke on his pride? Did Blake try to claim he always believed in you? I smiled at her characterization, so accurate yet ultimately secondary to what had actually occurred. It was a beginning, I said thoughtfully. Not a resolution or a complete reconciliation, but an honest acknowledgement of reality. That's more than I expected, truthfully. Are you going to the lake house in February? I moved to the windows, looking out at the city where I'd built my life and career. I'm not sure yet. Part of me wants to explore what a relationship with them might look like now that the power dynamic has fundamentally changed. Another part wonders if some divides can never truly be bridged. Emma came to stand beside me. Whatever you decide, you're making the choice from a position of strength and self-knowledge. That's what's different now. She was right. The revelation had shifted not just my family's perception of me, but something deeper within myself. For years, despite external success, I had carried the weight of their dismissal, an invisible tax on my achievements, a shadow over my victories. That burden had lifted now, not because they finally recognized my worth, but because I had claimed the authority to define it for myself. In the weeks that followed, Seattle's business community buzzed with the dramatic New Year's revelation. The story took on almost mythic qualities in each retelling: the underestimated daughter, the clueless family, the perfectly orchestrated unveiling of truth. Requests for interviews and speaking engagements flooded in, all eager to share the tale of the real estate visionary who had silently built an empire while her own family remained oblivious. I declined most of these opportunities, sharing only a brief statement with the Seattle Business Journal. Success isn't measured by others' recognition. It's built through vision, perseverance, and the courage to define achievement on your own terms. That statement became something of a mantra among young entrepreneurs in the city. a reminder that validation often follows creation rather than preceding it, that the most meaningful accomplishments sometimes emerge from the very choices others question most persistently. As for my family, the process of redefining our relationship had begun, tentatively, imperfectly, but with a new foundation of truth that made authentic connection possible for the first time in years. Whether we would build something meaningful on that foundation remained to be seen, but the architectural plans, at least, now reflected reality rather than illusion. If you've ever been told that your path wasn't valid or your dreams weren't realistic, I later reflected, remember that sometimes the most powerful response isn't argument but achievement. Let your success become undeniable, not to prove others wrong, but to prove yourself right. The new year had begun with a revelation that transformed not just my family's perception, but my own relationship with validation. I no longer carried the weight of their judgment. I had replaced it with something far more valuable, the freedom that comes from owning your narrative completely, from standing in your truth so firmly that no one else's version of your story can diminish the reality you've built. The weeks following New Year's unfolded with unexpected developments. Where I had anticipated awkward silence from my family, I instead received cautious outreach. My father called first, his typically authoritative voice replaced by something almost hesitant as he asked if we could meet for coffee. Just the two of us, Olivia, no agenda, no expectations. We met at a small cafe halfway between his law offices and my downtown headquarters. He arrived early, I noticed, something the perpetually time-pressed Bradford Reeves rarely did for anyone. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began after our drinks arrived. He turned his coffee cup, slowly, precisely, a man accustomed to controlling every conversation now navigating unfamiliar territory. About perception, about how we construct narratives to support our worldview, even when evidence contradicts them. I remained silent, giving him space to continue. "When you left law school, I saw it through a very specific lens, the lens of my own experience, my own definition of success." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I never considered that my frame of reference might be limited, that success could look fundamentally different from what I understood it to be." This acknowledgement, coming from a man who had spent decades convinced of his own superior judgment, was nothing short of extraordinary. "I built my identity around being a certain kind of successful," he continued, "around following a predetermined path and excelling within established parameters. The idea that you could create something entirely new, something outside those parameters, was threatening. Not just to my expectations for you, but to my understanding of how success itself works." "And now?" I asked quietly. He gestured, vaguely toward the window, toward the Seattle skyline where several Harborview Properties were visible. "Now I'm trying to understand the journey I missed, to see the daughter I failed to recognize." So it wasn't quite an apology, but from Bradford Reeves it represented a seismic shift, an admission that his perception had been flawed, that his judgment had been not just incorrect, but fundamentally limited. "I can't change the last 5 years, I said finally. "I can't give you access to a journey you chose not to witness." He nodded, accepting this reality. "No, but I can choose to be present for what comes next, if you're willing." That conversation marked the beginning of a careful reconciliation. Not an immediate restoration of closeness, but the establishment of a new foundation based on who we had both become, rather than who we had been or what he had expected me to be. My mother's approach was different, less analytical, more emotional. She appeared unannounced at my office one afternoon, hesitating at the threshold when my assistant showed her in. "This is quite something," she said, taking in the sophisticated space with its commanding views and subtle displays of my company's achievements. "I'm trying to picture you creating all this, and I realize I can't. I don't know enough about your day-to-day life to even imagine it." Her honesty disarmed me. Would you like to see more? That afternoon became an impromptu tour, not just of my office, but of Harborview's downtown headquarters, a renovation in progress at our newest acquisition, and finally, the small boutique residential building where I'd secured my first major investment win. I remember when this was that rundown apartment complex with the terrible reviews, she said as we stood outside the now elegant building. Everyone said it was unsalvageable because of the location. Everyone except me, I noted. I saw the proximity to the tech corridor, the historic architecture underneath the bad renovations, the potential for community space in that unused courtyard. She studied the transformed property, then turned to me with new understanding. You've always seen things differently, haven't you? Even as a child. I never recognized it as a strength. These initial reconnections with my parents were tentative, imperfect, but genuine, characterized by their willingness to see me through a new lens and my cautious openness to being seen. Uncle Richard and Aunt Gwendolyn maintained a frosty distance, their pride too wounded for immediate reconciliation. Blake oscillated between resentful silence and transparent attempts to leverage our connection, suddenly eager to mention his successful cousin in real estate to impress his social circle. Emma remained my steadfast ally through it all, documenting the family's evolving reactions with both her characteristic humor and unexpected insight. They're going through the stages of grief, she observed over lunch one day. But they're grieving their own illusions, not actual loss. Her perspective helped me maintain emotional distance from their process, understanding that their struggle to reconcile the reality of my success with their long-held narrative was their work to do, not mine. February arrived, bringing with it the traditional President's Day family gathering at the lake house, now my lake house, held in trust for family use. I deliberated long over whether to attend, weighing the potential for meaningful connection against the risk of premature closure. You should go, Marcus advised unexpectedly during our weekly security briefing. When I looked surprised at his personal input, he continued with characteristic directness. You've shown them who you are professionally, but there's power in showing them who you are personally, on your own terms, in a space you now control. His logic resonated with my strategic thinking. The lake house gathering offered an opportunity to establish new patterns of interaction from a position of strength rather than the defensive posture I'd occupied in family settings before. I arrived on Saturday afternoon, driving myself in my Audi rather than using the company car service, a deliberate choice to enter simply, without the trappings of corporate success that had so startled them on New Year's Eve. The lakeside property looked much as it had during my childhood, though the restoration team had meticulously addressed years of deferred maintenance, returning the cedar-shingled exterior to its original warmth and structural integrity. My father met me at the door, another departure from protocol in a family where newcomers typically sought out the hosts rather than being greeted upon arrival. "You're here," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I'm here," I agreed, accepting. His awkward half-hug before stepping into the great room where a fire crackled in the massive stone fireplace that had been the heart of countless family gatherings. The room fell momentarily silent as I entered, conversations pausing as relatives registered my presence. Some faces registered surprise, others curiosity, a few undisguised calculation as they reassessed my position in the family hierarchy. "Olivia!" my mother called, breaking the tension as she crossed the room to embrace me. "We're so glad you could make it. Come, everything's just as you remembered it." But it wasn't, of course. The physical space might have been restored to its former appearance, but the dynamics within it had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the disappointing daughter relegated to the periphery of family gatherings. I was the owner of the property, the preserver of the family legacy, the success story they were still struggling to comprehend. Uncle Richard maintained a careful distance throughout the afternoon, his customary dominance of family discussions, notably subdued. When conversations turned to business or investments, topics where he had once held court unchallenged, he would glance in my direction with reluctant deference. During dinner, the conversation inevitably circled to Harborview Properties. Cousin Blake, several drinks past discretion, leaned across the table with manufactured casualness. So, Olivia, I've been thinking about getting into real estate development myself. Maybe you could bring me in on your next project. With my legal background and your experience, we could make quite a team. The table quieted, everyone watching, for my response to this transparent attempt to capitalize on our connection. Interesting proposition, I replied evenly. Harborview has a formal application process for our Development Associate program. Starting salary is $72,000 with a structured 3-year advancement track. The next cohort begins in June. Blake blinked, clearly having expected an executive position rather than an entry-level opportunity. But I'm family, he protested. Exactly, I agreed, looking him directly in the eyes. Which is why I'm offering you the same opportunity I would offer anyone else, rather than closing the door entirely based on past behavior. A ripple of uncomfortable recognition passed through the gathered relatives. The implied message was clear. My company operated on merit, not nepotism, the exact opposite of the family dynamic that had excluded me for years. Speaking of Harborview, Aunt Gwendolyn interjected with forced brightness, we've been seeing your buildings everywhere. The new waterfront development is quite visible. Her phrasing revealed her continued struggle to offer genuine acknowledgement. In Gwendolyn's carefully calibrated social hierarchy, success was only valuable when it came through approved channels. My achievement remained problematic for her precisely because it had occurred outside the pathways she recognized as legitimate. The Westlake Waterfront project is our most ambitious to date, I acknowledged. We're particularly proud of the public access features. The 2-acre park and community art space will be open to everyone, not just residents. Is that profitable? Uncle Richard asked, unable to conceal his skepticism about any development that incorporated public benefit. Extraordinarily, I replied. The community integration has made the residential units the most desirable in the city. We have a 3-year waiting list, despite premium pricing. I could have elaborated on how this approach had revolutionized luxury development in Seattle, creating a model where exclusivity and community benefit reinforced rather than opposed each other. I could have explained the tax advantages and municipal support that made the economics work brilliantly. But I recognized his question wasn't really about business strategy. It was about challenging the validity of my success. The market has responded enthusiastically to our vision, I concluded simply, as have industry leaders and urban development experts. Later that evening, I stepped outside onto the dock that extended into the lake, seeking a moment of quiet reflection. The February air was crisp, the water still as glass, reflecting the waning moon and scattered stars. This dock had been my thinking place throughout childhood, the spot where I'd dreamed, planned, and sometimes escaped family tensions. Footsteps on the weathered boards announced someone's approach. I turned to find my father, holding 2 mugs, of the hot cider that had been a lake house tradition for as long as I could remember. "Peace offering," he said, extending 1 mug to me. I accepted it with a small smile. Is peace what we're negotiating? He considered this, looking out over the dark water. Understanding, perhaps. A new kind of relationship. We stood in companionable silence for several minutes, steam rising from our mugs into the cold air. I keep thinking about that day, in my office, he said finally. When you told me you were leaving law school, I said things I've regretted more than you know. I remembered it vividly. His cold dismissal, the ultimatum, the absolute certainty that I was making a catastrophic mistake. You said no daughter of yours would be a glorified landlord, I recalled. That I was throwing away generations of Reeves' legal tradition for a passing whim. He winced at the verbatim recall. I was wrong. Not just about your career choice, but about what makes a legacy meaningful. He turned to face me directly. The Reeves legal tradition began because my grandfather saw an opportunity to build something valuable in a different field than his father's. He was also rejected by his family for breaking tradition. This was family history I'd never heard before, a convenient omission in the narrative of unbroken legal legacy I'd been raised with. Your great-grandfather was a shipbuilder, my father continued. He disowned my grandfather for choosing law instead of joining the family business. The shipyard eventually failed during the Depression, while the law practice thrived. But that, part of our history was, minimized over time, rewritten to make our path seem predestined rather than chosen. The parallel was striking, a family pattern repeating itself across generations, the fear of divergence manifesting as rejection. The narrative reshaped after success validated the very choice that had been condemned. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I almost made the same mistake he did, my father admitted. I almost lost a daughter because I couldn't see beyond my own narrow definition of success. And because I want you to understand that what you've built, this vision you've created, it's not separate from the Reeves legacy. It's the continuation of it in the most authentic way possible. His words offered a reframing I hadn't expected. Not just acknowledgement of my individual achievement, but recognition of how it connected to, rather than rejected, our family's true history. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness, he added. Just the chance to know the remarkable woman my daughter has become. On her terms, not mine. In that moment, on the dock where I'd once dreamed of futures my family couldn't envision, I felt a shift in my own perspective, a willingness to consider that reconciliation might be possible without compromising the independence I'd fought so hard to establish. I'd like that, I said simply. The rest of the weekend brought similar moments of recalibration, spaces where new understandings could begin to take root. Not dramatic transformations or tearful group hugs, but small acknowledgments, genuine questions about my work, tentative expressions of pride that seemed motivated by actual recognition rather than reflected glory. As I prepared to leave on Monday afternoon, my mother walked me to my car. "Will you come back for Easter?" she asked. "Or is it too soon?" I considered her question thoughtfully. "I think I'd like that," I replied. "But I'll have Emma with me. She's been my family through all of this, and that doesn't change moving forward." My mother nodded, accepting this boundary. "Of course. She's always welcome. She was right to stand by you when we didn't." As I drove back to Seattle, watching the lake house grow smaller in my rearview mirror, I reflected on the weekend's subtle recalibrations. The family dynamic had fundamentally shifted, not just because of my revealed success, but because I now engaged from a position of self-defined worth rather than seeking external validation. The following months brought continued evolution in both my business and family relationships. Harborview expanded into sustainable community development across the Pacific Northwest, pioneering a model that balanced profitability with social impact. My father began referring legal work to our in-house counsel, a small but significant acknowledgement of our professional legitimacy. Family gatherings became more frequent and progressively less awkward. Not perfect, not without occasional tension. When old patterns surfaced, but increasingly authentic as we learned to relate to each other as the adults we had become, rather than the roles we had once occupied. Uncle Richard remained the most resistant to the new reality, though even he grudgingly began to acknowledge my business acumen after Harborview was featured in a Harvard Business Review case study. Aunt Gwendolyn found it easier to boast about her successful niece in real estate than to develop a genuine relationship, but her passive-aggressive comments became notably less frequent. Blake, surprisingly, eventually applied to Harborview's development associate program through the formal channels, and was rejected based on his qualifications rather than his connection. Instead of retreating into resentment, he asked for specific feedback and reapplied 6 months later with additional relevant experience and a thoughtful development proposal. His second application was accepted, and he began the humbling process of learning the business from the ground up, something I watched with cautious optimism. One evening in late summer, I hosted a small dinner at my downtown penthouse for Emma, my parents, and a few close friends who had supported my journey from the beginning. As conversations flowed easily around the table, discussions of business, community initiatives, personal milestones, I found myself observing the scene with a sense of completion. My father was engaged in a spirited discussion about urban development with my head of acquisitions, genuinely interested rather than performatively supportive. My mother and Emma were sharing stories that bridged the 5-year gap, filling in the personal history that had been lost during our estrangement. The boundaries between my family life and professional world, once so rigidly separated, had become permeable in the healthiest sense. After dinner, as we moved to the terrace, with dessert and coffee, my father approached me privately. "I visited the Aurora Avenue property last week," he said, referring to my first acquisition, the struggling apartment complex that had become the foundation of my company. "Any particular reason?" I asked, curious about what would draw him to that specific location. "I wanted to see where it began," he explained, "to understand what you saw that no one else did." The gesture touched me unexpectedly. This effort to literally stand where I had stood, to see through my eyes rather than imposing his vision. "What did you think?" I asked. "I thought about perspective," he replied thoughtfully. "About how the same physical space can represent entirely different possibilities depending on who's looking at it and what questions they're asking." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I realized that's what I failed to do with you. To consider that you might be seeing opportunities and asking questions I hadn't even thought to formulate." This insight, this fundamental shift from judging to understanding, represented the most meaningful acknowledgement he could offer. Later that evening, after everyone had departed, Emma lingered to help clear the last glasses from the terrace. "So," she said, studying me with her perceptive gaze, "are we officially in the happy ending portion of this story?" I laughed at her framing. "I don't think it works that way. It's not about endings, happy or otherwise. It's about continuing to build, both structures and relationships." "Very philosophical," she teased. "But seriously, Liv, are you at peace with how things have evolved? With the family finding their way back on your terms?" I considered her question as we looked out at the Seattle skyline, the city lights reflecting on Elliott Bay. "I'm at peace with my journey," I said finally, "with the choices I made and the vision I followed. The family reconciliation is still a work in progress, valuable but separate from my sense of completion." And that was the true resolution, not the external validation that had finally come from family, colleagues, and community, but the internal certainty that had developed through the process of creation. The knowledge that my worth had never depended on their recognition, that my path had been valid not because it eventually led to success they could understand, but because it had been authentically mine from the beginning. In the year that followed, I was invited to give a commencement address at my former university. Standing before thousands of graduates, I shared not just the dramatic revelation of New Year's Eve, but the quieter, more profound realization that had come afterward. "Success is not measured by the moment others recognize your value," I told them. "It's built in the thousands of moments when you choose your authentic path despite doubt, both external and internal. It's found in the courage to define achievement, on your own terms, and the persistence to bring that vision into reality." I looked out at the sea of faces, young people standing at the threshold of their own journeys, navigating between expectations and aspirations, between security and possibility. The most powerful moment in my career wasn't when my family finally saw my name on the building, I continued. It was the day I signed the papers for my first property, hands shaking but heart certain, stepping into an unknown future that belonged entirely to me. The lesson of my journey wasn't about vindication, or even reconciliation, though both had eventually come. It was about the liberation that comes from claiming your own definition of success, one based not on others' recognition, but on your alignment with your deepest values and most authentic vision. As you leave here today, I concluded, you'll receive countless messages about what success should look like, what achievements matter, what paths are valid. Remember that the most meaningful measurement isn't external validation, but internal integrity, the knowledge that you've built a life that reflects your unique perspective and purpose. The lake house became a gathering place once again, but with a fundamental difference. Family connections were no longer conditional on conformity. Different paths were recognized not just as acceptable alternatives, but as valuable expansions of our collective legacy. And the lease agreement, that document that had so dramatically revealed ownership on New Year's Eve, remained framed in my office, not as a reminder of the moment my family finally saw my worth, but as a testament to the journey that had allowed me to recognize it for myself. If you've ever stood at a crossroads between others' expectations and your own vision, trust that the most powerful validation isn't external recognition, but the quiet certainty that comes from building something authentic to your unique perspective. Success isn't proven when they finally see your name on the building. It's created with every brick you place according to your own blueprint, regardless of who's watching or what they believe is possible. The most meaningful achievements aren't those that silence critics or impress skeptics. They're the ones that align so perfectly with your values and vision that external validation becomes secondary to the satisfaction of creation itself. Your journey matters. Your perspective is valuable. And your definition of success is yours to determine. Not because others eventually recognize it, but because you have the courage to claim it from the very beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.